Alright guys, we are back with another tier list. Today we're doing the entire tier list for Master Duel, the entire Master Duel meta. But first, do you want to make your Master Duel experience a whole lot better?
Are you ready to take your Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel play experience to a new level? The Untapped GG Companion is here for you. Use the deck tracker to know exactly what cards you have in your deck, and to go over any cards you aren't familiar with yet by hovering over them. It instantly updates when you draw a card, and automatically hides if you check your extra deck or graveyard. This is the perfect tool to help you master a new deck. The Untapped GG Companion also lets you import decks directly into the game in seconds. Copy any YDK or YDKE deck string, create a new deck in game, click the Start Auto Import button, and let us take the wheel. Once the duel is over, check your win rate on your personal stats page. Brag among your friends and share your decks so they can import them into the game too. Start your path to master today by downloading the Untapped GG Companion at ygom.untapped.gg.
Alright, we're back. So today we're doing this meta tier list for Master Duel. Obviously, there's a bunch of new decks that have come out, and a lot of things have morphed around and shifted, and things have moved, and things have gotten better, things have gotten worse. And we're going to talk about all of that today. A lot of different decks came out, so it's really important. And then we had multiple ban lists as always, because Master Duel has like 2 ban lists every month. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, this is a tier list for the ladder. This is the platinum ladder. This doesn't count tournaments that you might do where a side deck is available. No, this is just the ladder, the Master Duel ranked ladder, where you go to master, and the best decks are the ones that can easily go to master. The worst decks that have almost no chance whatsoever of getting to master. So that's the way we're going to do it. So we can get started with the most controversial one. This is Super Heavy Samurai. I'm putting this in tier 2. A lot of you might think this is definitely a tier 1 deck. I don't think this is a tier 1 deck. Everyone is playing outs to everything that this is playing. Everyone is playing Droll right now. Everyone is playing Nibiru right now, which Nibiru isn't that good against this deck, but still, everyone's playing the outs. Some people are even going as far as to play the Magician, the Performer Pal Magician that stops your opponent from activating any monster effects or attacking. They're using that Performer Pal thing that looks like Goku. They're using that to stop this deck. Everyone's playing outs to this deck. On top of that, Max Siege just straight bodies this deck because they can't use Call by the Grave because they can't use spells. They can't use the other hand trap that essentially, not the hand trap, Nobleman of Crossout. Or I should say, they can't use Crossout Designator. That's the card that they can't use. Because again, you just can't activate spell cards, so you can't use any of the anti-spell, any of the anti-hand trap cards in your deck, so it kind of hinders the deck. Now those are the negatives, but realistically, like if those didn't exist, this would easily probably be the best deck in the game right now. If people weren't main decking Droll to out this, if people weren't specifically playing around this exact matchup, it would probably easily be the best deck. Its combo potential is insane. It can end on Barone before 5 summons, and even if you Nibiru them, they still can just play around it anyway. The deck is crazy. It's an outrageously strong combo deck. It almost feels like some of the other combo decks that we've had in previous months of Master Duel where they've been like tier 0. But this did get hit a little bit on release, so it's not like it's absolutely at full power. But it's definitely a very strong deck. It just really lacks from being able to side deck, from being able to run anti-hand trap cards, and Maxi really hits this deck quite hard. And that's probably the only thing keeping it from being tier 1, but it's definitely a deck you could easily get to Master 1 with. Next is Gold Pride. Gold Pride, I think, is tier, it's either Rogue or tier 3. Gold Pride is basically a deck that benefits from having lower life points than your opponent. You can use the Punk engine along with Gold Pride, and that makes the deck very, very strong. It's a very high Rogue deck. It's definitely a good deck. The problem with this deck is it definitely lacks a little bit of consistency. It definitely has some trouble with consistency. But overall, it's like a decently strong deck, but it's not like outrageous where it's like as good as like a Super Heavy Samurai, for example. The Punk engine in it is very good. And if it can get to a rank 3, one of the rank 3 monsters, the Chariot, it basically is game right there. Like that's usually where you're trying to get to, but the problem is it has a trouble going second. It has some consistency issues, but overall the deck is kind of not that great, but it's okay. Next is Nemleria, I believe that's what it's called. This is a deck that basically cool artwork and cool idea for a deck. It's basically like the Pendulum is a little kid that is dreaming things up, which are basically like dreaming up a bunch of monsters in the shape of desserts, and then those are your monsters. And the pendulum little girl you send to the extra deck, and when she's in the extra deck, you get to do all of these cool additional things. The deck basically banishes cards off the top of it, it basically banishes cards from the extra deck, and then you get to face down, and then you get to special summon giant monsters from your hand, and then those giant monsters essentially get additional effects when you have a face-up pendulum monster in your extra deck. The deck overall, very creative, very cool, and it's most of the time you're playing it, it's a going second deck. You main deck things like Lava Golem, because you really don't normal summon ever. Lava Golem, Raw Sphere mode, if you, probably not Raw Sphere mode, but definitely Lava Golem, Kaijus if you want to. But basically that's what you're main decking. Definitely a going second deck. It's a little tough to go second in Master Duel when you have to play around a full board, and on top of playing around a full board, you then have to play around Maxi. That is really rough, because if you don't OTK your opponent, they're going to win on their crackback, because they're always going to maxi, they're always going to draw a ton of stuff, and you can't really afford to play Call by the Grave in a going second deck. It's just very, very, it's just not good. So that's kind of the issue with the deck. It's a going second deck that has to special summon a ton of times, but overall I think it's a very creative concept. You can even make the argument it could be tier 3. Same thing with Gold Pride. Either one of these could be tier 3 Rogue. They're probably somewhere around there. They're probably on the very, very high end of Rogue. Next is Dinosaurs. This got new support with the new normal support. They got a new search spell. Honestly, it kind of lifts the ceiling of the deck, but it's kind of the same problem that G-Golem has for Salamangreats, where it lifts the ceiling of the deck, but it makes the deck significantly more bricky, because now you're playing more search cards, you're playing a normal monster. They have a level 6 new dinosaur that's actually a tuner that can help you get into Barone very, very easily, because you can basically Soul Eating Oviraptor plus that new level 6 tuner, and it, bam, right there you have a Barone, and he's actually a very good monster. Like, that's the main issue with it. It's just you're introducing a lot of additional bricks to your deck, and you are technically raising the ceiling, you're raising the combo potential, but this deck already has a lot of trouble with bricking dinosaurs. It already has so much trouble with bricking. You definitely do not want to make any more trouble for yourself. So I'd say it's probably somewhere in tier 3. Pure Adventure is just not a deck, and the majority of the engines hit. Once in a while you'll catch this engine in various decks like Virtual World or something like that, but for the most part this is pretty much gone. This is, I'd say it's Exosisters is a decent deck, not an outrageously good deck. I think it's probably somewhere around tier 3. It's had its highs was in the tier limit meta. That's when it was absolutely at its 100% best. Yeah, that's when it was at its best. The tier limit meta was where it was at for Exosisters. Unfortunately, right now Exosisters is definitely not where it used to be. It's a deck that basically relies on the graveyard, and when the entire meta is defined around movement out of the graveyard, this deck can be very good. But right now you have a variety of decks that possibly don't even touch the graveyard. Labyrinth, for example, they don't start really touching the graveyard until like your turn, which, you know, it's just kind of the issue there. Same thing with super heavies. They sometimes don't touch it right away, and that's kind of the larger issue. It's just very, very matchup dependent. Even when you don't play against a deck that has to touch the graveyard a bunch of times, you still have Martha, so you can actually like start your combos, which is kind of cool. You can play DD Crows and stuff like that to prompt things. And then the deck, when it sets up, it can banish like 4 monsters a turn, which is kind of crazy, or 4 cards a turn. But overall, I just think it's had better metas than it is right now. This is Labyrinth. I think this is a tier 2 deck. It's the best trap card deck in the game. It can play on your turn, on your opponent's turn. It can play on turn 0 if you want to. You can set, yeah, you can. It has a really good matchup against super heavy samurai, like really good. That Performapal magician that I was talking about that prevents the super heavy samurais from playing, that card you can actually set up on turn 0 with Labyrinth, because if you just activate like one of the pieces of furniture and send it to the graveyard and set a card from your deck, you can actually activate it back in your Pendulum zone. It's kind of like outrageous. But yeah, this deck is just very, very, very strong. It's, as far as back row decks go, it's probably the best that you'll get. It's just a very strong back row deck. It's very tough to play against. It's one of the decks that probably people hate the most, but Konami hits the least. Because like, as much as Floodgates are annoying, and Floodgates are annoying, they are very annoying, but honestly, like, this deck is frustrating because they play on your turn and on their turn, and it just never seems to end. It's like a circle of hell. Next is this is Lightsworns are getting support. I put in consider building something else because Tearlaments is objectively a better version of Lightsworns. Lightsworns are scheduled to get new support. They announced it, so it comes out in the OCG probably in a month or so, which means it comes out in the TCG in 6 months, which means it comes out in Master Duel probably next year. So until that happens, Lightsworns are, and consider building something else, and you should build Tearlaments instead. Next is Raidraptors. Raidraptors are good. They're probably in they've been a rogue deck almost every single time. They can do a lot of different things, especially with the Phantom-Knights engine mixed in. They can do a lot. They can set up multiple negates, multiple interruptions. I just say they have trouble a little bit with consistency, but more so with going second, especially playing against like huge boards, especially playing into boards like a Labyrinth board, or even like a dinosaur board is a tough board to play into. So I think it's definitely somewhere around Rogue. Eldritch is it's either bottom of Rogue or consider building something else. This deck is wrecked right now. There's not a lot going on. All the floodgates are hit. This deck relies on floodgates. Without floodgates, it's like there's no point to play it. And then the best deck in the game right now is a debate, but definitely Despia, and the brand Despia is up there, and they still play all the Bystials. A lot of people cut the Bystials out of their main decks because obviously they cut them out of the main decks because Tearlaments isn't the best deck in the game anymore. But if Bystials are around, you just absolutely cannot play Eldritch. Eldritch is just it literally is unplayable, because the second you activate an Eldritch, they activate a Bystial, they mana share a monster, they get to summon a monster, and they get to search. And you just went like -2 in card advantage, and you lost a card on the board, and you never get your Eldritch. Now you can't activate your traps because they don't do anything, and you have no floodgates to fall back on. It's not like, oh, it's okay, I'll just go next turn, I'll activate skill drain. You have one skill drain, you have one rivalry, you have one goes in match, you have one there can only be one, and you're not playing there can only be one in Eldritch anyway, because it prevents you from summoning more than one zombie. So realistically, you have 3 floodgates left in the entire deck. So the deck is just super consider building something else, and what I would consider building is Labyrinth. It's just the better. You want to play a trap deck, play Labyrinth. I'm sorry to say it, but you got to. It's the reality of the situation. Next is Insects. This is people call it iLink. It's like Insect Link. It's basically all of the best insect monsters that have ever come out. It's like Dragon Link, but now it's Insect Link. You basically mix all of the best insect support that has ever come out. You can get creative with it, because not a lot. This is to a large degree unexplored land. Basically, you look at every single insect monster that Konami's ever printed, and you go, okay, let me see which one's special summon efficiently, and then you throw it all together into one big deck, and you just basically, you can set up pretty easy interruptions. You can get on a Barone, you can get on a variety of things before they insect lock you, but the deck is actually quite good. I'd say it's probably in tier 3. I should, if you want to see what this deck functions like, definitely go check out some videos on it. The deck is actually kind of cool. You can go into the trap trick route and set up trap holes. You can go into the combo route. The new crawler that came out a few months ago is really good in this deck. Yeah, just a really strong deck. Definitely somewhere in tier 3, just because it has, again, just a bit of consistency issues, and you definitely don't want to go the fusion route, but it's definitely a very cool deck. This is Goki. Goki's like, I'd say, a bottom end rogue deck. It relies entirely on link summons, and links right now are just not that strong, with the exception of like a Cyber's pile deck. Other than that, links are just in a part of the metagame where they're just not super represented and super strong right now. Next is Monarchs. Monarchs is another deck that's just, I almost want to put it in consider building something else, because like Floowandereeze has just been controlling the tribute summon game state for the last, since they've come out. Like, that is the best tribute summon deck by far, in a way, like by a million years. I'm probably going to put this in consideration. We got to mix stuff up. I would say this is consider building something else. Like, obviously Monarchs are recognizably different from Floowandereeze, but if your goal is to play old school Yu-Gi-Oh! And tribute summon, Floowandereeze just beats them in every single way. This deck has to play around Mekk-C. Floowandereeze never have to play around Mekk-C. This deck has to worry about their graveyard and things getting banished. Floowandereeze doesn't. It just doesn't have to worry about that stuff, because they all get banished anyway. So this deck is probably in consider building something else. DDD, the highest IQ deck to ever be invented, uses every single summoning mechanic, and it doesn't cheat the summoning mechanics like certain other archetypes we're going to get to later. You actually be hyper intelligent to play this. You can go to Harvard, or you can play DDDs. It's a decision you have to make with your life. One will make you millions of dollars. The other one, you'll just be some anonymous person on Master Duel playing playing DDDs. That's what you're doing with your life. You're doing that, or you can go be an aerospace engineer. It's a tough choice. It's a toss-up, but this deck takes an insane amount of IQ. If you're not intelligent, I wouldn't even think about playing DDDs. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if you're smart enough to even think about playing DDDs. It might hurt your mind. So that very high IQ deck, definitely somewhere around tier 3. Awesome deck to play too. This is Avoid at All Costs. Familiar Possessed is a mess of an archetype. It's basically a bunch of monsters with useless effects, except for the ones that summon themselves from the deck. Those are okay. But it's basically a bunch of monsters that do nothing, and then a bunch of cards that either boost them in attack or floodgates like Secret Village and Magician's Right Hand and Left Hand and stuff like that. So that's essentially the entire deck. It's a bunch of monsters that don't do anything, and then floodgates, and then the links are kind of cool too because they steal things out of the graveyard. But as far as decks go, this is either avoid at all costs or consider building something else. Realistically, the better deck to play is either A, Dogmatica, if you're talking about a pure spellcaster deck, or Altergeist, or yeah, like one of those, like one of the good pure spellcaster decks. Next is Neos. Neos is in Rogue, kind of like a lower tier Rogue. We're still waiting for Air Neos to come out, and I don't think it's ever coming out. And on top of Air Neos being missing in action, on top of that, the deck is just a little bit lacking in support. Honestly, pure heroes is just better right now than pure, like not pure heroes, but heroes in general as an entire overarching archetype is actually better than Neos, because Neos has been like more lacking in support than the overarching, like every single hero combined. The only thing you really have to fall back on is really Neos Fusion. Neos Fusion is a good card, and obviously you can go into Rainbow Neos and do stuff like that, but for the most part I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Fortune Ladies is just an archetype that sucks in every single way. I don't even know who came up with this archetype. It is outdated, and at the same time doesn't have any broken cards. I don't know how they managed to do that. Because with Yu-Gi-Oh, usually there's like one broken card per archetype where you could go, oof, that's a really good card. If they put that in tier limits, we'd be in real trouble. There's not a single card in this archetype where you could put it in another archetype and it'd be good. Every single card in this archetype is bad in an archetype, and it would still be bad in other archetypes. It's not a good archetype. I don't know how they made this archetype such a disaster. Maybe you could make an argument for the Synchro Monster, but even that's like just... even that's not good. All right, next is Adamancipator. This is a rogue deck. It's a this is what Super Heavy Samurai is now. This used to be a combo deck that could play through multiple hand traps that was just really, really good. And what enabled that was Block Dragon. With Block Dragon gone, you can't, you don't have the fuel to just keep going and going and going. You don't have the fossil fuels. You are done with this, because basically, with these monsters now, the Adamancipators, you don't have the Block Dragon. Block Dragon used to be able to search you 3 monsters after you linked them away. So you already comboed, started making a board, linked away the Block Dragon, searched 3 monsters. It was insane, and now that's gone. So essentially, the kind of like refuel aspect of this deck is over. So you really can't, it can't combo quite as long, and it's very, very fragile now. Crystal Beast is probably like a higher end rogue deck. I've put in tier 3 in the past, but it's interchangeable. It depends on which floodgates are available in the game. Yeah, like this deck is very good with floodgates. There Can Only Be One was huge for this deck, and that going to 1 definitely hurt the deck for sure. Yeah, floodgates are huge for this deck. This deck uses floodgate monsters, regular floodgates. Like, this deck is kind of like crazy. There Can Only Be One. It can play under basically any floodgate that you can think of. There Can Only Be One is one of its main floodgates. On top of that, you don't want to play the combo version. You definitely want to play the non-combo version of Crystal Beast. It's definitely 100% better. The nice control one that uses Conclave control that can go into a Bagusco without even trying. Like, that version is the best version of this deck. So I'd say it's probably somewhere in Rogue. Tunes is in Consider Building Something Else. This is a deck that is just missing it's just missing cards. It feels empty. Like, it's so tough to get anything done with this archetype. And then on top of that, it's slow. It's a slow archetype. Like, you summon a monster, then you gotta wait to attack, and you can attack directly, but you can't attack directly till later, unless it's Dark Magician Girl or Blackluster Soldier. But it's like, it's such a slow archetype. That's the issue with Tunes. It definitely 100% just something that just needs support. Pendulums is probably, this is like a mix of Pendulums, but like, I'd say like a Pendulum pile deck is probably somewhere around tier 3. It's a deck that can combo off a ton, and if it goes first, it's pretty much going to win no matter what. But right now, the premier Pendulum deck to play 100% 100% is the Super Heavy Samurais. Not like a mixed Magician Pendulum deck. It's definitely 100% Super Heavy Samurais. Another Tier 1 deck, I think Manadium is a Tier 1 deck. Last time I put Manadium at Tier 2, and people were like, you overrated it. I don't think it's that good. You know what? I don't say this often, but I was right. I was very right. It really is. This deck is absolutely insane. It can really play through combo. Like, it can play through a lot of... You can hand trap this deck twice sometimes, and they just like shrug it off. And they end on like a Barone and the Vizas monster that's a fusion, and they just end on this board, and you hand trap them twice, and they look at you like you're crazy. This deck is really good, and it uses all the summoning mechanics. And just between you and me, this deck completes all of the dailies in one day. You can not play Master Duel for 3 days, and then hop on, play this deck for 2 matches, and you complete all your dailies. It's kind of incredible. But it's definitely a Tier 1 deck, 100%. This is a very, very strong deck. And since a lot of the other decks got hit on the ban list, and this definitely did not get hit on the ban list, this deck just got that much better, because a lot of the more floodgatey decks got hit. Obviously, they hit a little bit of Pearly, they hit a little bit of this and that, and this deck got left untouched. So definitely Tier 1. 100%. Next is Heroes. This is the hero deck, Omni Heroes they call it. Basically all of the heroes thrown into one big pile, just as if Jaden is playing it. This hero deck is it's good. I wouldn't say it's like fantastic right now. Darklaw's okay in the meta right now. It's not like the best card ever. Same thing with Mr. DPE. He's like okay in the game right now. I wouldn't say he's like outrageous. The deck generally I've been seeing more often now has been opting to go second, which I'm happy to see, because that's the way I prefer to play the deck too. Super poly, go second. You know, do your thing. That's the way I think to play it. But the problem with going second is obviously it's the biggest problem with going second is the max seed problem, because you get max seed and you're like, okay, now what do I do? Do I keep playing and OTK them, or are they going to stop me and I'm going to lose? Like that's the number one problem of going second decks. Shaddolls is middle of Rogue, I'd say. Middle of Rogue is a fair place to put Shaddolls. Not in the best place, not in the worst place. Dogmatica Shaddoll Invoke. This deck is just super outdated, super slow. It got completely power crapped by Tearlaments and to a certain Tearlaments and Branded. Like, Branded is the premier fusion deck right now. There's not a better fusion deck in the game than Branded. It is the best. It's not getting hit. The pack is still in the store. They are not hitting that deck, and it's been the best. Probably of any deck, the most times out of any deck, it's been Branded. And it's in multiple packs that you have to buy. There's so many URs. I just don't see them hitting that deck more than they've already hit it. It's been the best deck. Probably, like, if you do a percentage chart of which deck was the best in the game, Brandon's probably been the most. And this is just kind of, it's basically Winda. It's basically like Winda pass at this point. And if they can out a Winda, the game plan's over. Next is Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes got a little bit better, so it did get better because the combo version got better. The control version of Blue Eyes got worse. The combo version of Blue Eyes got better. The combo version of Blue Eyes got a few cards. They got Rimbrum, which is the tuner monster. He's a tuner that, when he's used as material, summons another tuner that's level 2. So you can basically make a disbatter with Blue Eyes, bring back one of your banished cards to your hand, and then or special summon one of your banished cards, and then you can make the Rimbrum token and then make Baron de Fleur. So you can get double interruptions off of a level 8 and then the Rimbrum. So it's actually kind of cool. You get to keep fueling yourself. So the deck definitely got better than it was before. It's probably the best state it's been in a few months. It's almost like a little bit indirect support. And then Jet is obviously, shout out Blue Eyes Jet Dragon, just a really, really strong card. Next we've got Windups. This is a deck that was super overhyped when they were like, oh, they took Zenmaites off the ban. Like, and what happened? Nothing. You ever see anybody playing this? No. But you have to respect it, because it can still hand loop you. So I respect it, but going second, like, what are you really going to do with this deck? Going first, obviously, hand loop. Decent deck, but I wouldn't say anything too crazy. And hand traps definitely will stop this deck. Next is Wind Witch. Is a consider building something else. It's a wind package that is just much too slow. All it can basically do is summon Crystal Wing. And sometimes you can go into like a Crystal Wing and a Baron. And that's like the best possible. If I let you pick Wind Witch monsters, if I sat across from a Wind Witch player and I was like, show me your best hand, they would summon a Crystal Wing and a Baron de Fleur. And that's it. That's their best hand. Most of the time you brick. And The problem is that used to be enough in 2017, where you can play a bunch of trap cards and then summon a Crystal Wing. That was phenomenal. That was like that was the meta. It was Crystal Wing, and you set trap cards, artifacts, whatever. That was the meta game. You were like, wow, this is, how am I going to play through this? A Crystal Wing and a artifact Lancia. Like, that was the meta game in 2017. Today, that's like nothing. That's like, it doesn't matter. One Crystal Wing is irrelevant. It's like, oh, Crystal Wing, cool, Imperm. Okay, let me keep playing. It's like, it doesn't matter. And I miss Crystal Wing. He's a friend. Next is Phantasm Spirals. Phantasm Spirals is a rogue deck. I'd say it's at the higher end of rogue. The positive, so, a few things need to be said here. Phantasm Spirals is about as good. It's the best budget deck in the game ever, because you essentially don't have to use an extra deck, which saves you money. You don't have to use an extra deck, but here's the problem with this deck, and it can play every floodgate. And I don't mean, oh, maybe this one you get. No, literally every floodgate can be played in this deck. Here's the problem with this. You can play every floodgate, but they continue to hit floodgates. Also, you need the consistency draw cards. So we're talking Pot of Extravagance, limited to 1. Pot of Prosperity, limited to 1. Pot of Duality, limited to 1. Card of Demise, banned, gone. So how in the world are you going to draw in a deck that doesn't have any in-archetype draw cards? You can't. And that's the problem with this deck. It doesn't have an advantage loop outside of the field spell, and if they hit all of this other stuff, it makes the deck less and less and less playable. But you do have a newer card that came out in the Winged Dragon of Ra pack, and it is the Apophis, which is basically a continuous card that can help you negate your opponent's cards. That card is good, but to a large degree, this deck just continues to get hit peripherally because other Floodgates decks get hit. Infernoids is good. It'll get much better with the new fire support that's coming out, but again, Infernoids doesn't really like to play with others, so I don't know how much better it's going to get with the new fire support, so we'll have to see. But when the Evil Eye support comes out, and the, you know what I'm talking about, the Evil Eye and the Bonfire and all the other stuff comes out, I can see this deck being a lot better. But right now, it's definitely somewhere in Rogue. This is a flip effect deck, the best of the flip effect decks. The problem is the best of the worst is still not that great. And it is with the best flip effect deck we've ever seen, but as of right now, it is a little underwhelming, and I don't see it being much past Rogue, especially with Dragoon not in the game. Spiral is a deck that, it's tough to say where this deck is, because technically speaking, it's a strong deck. Like, on paper, it's a very strong deck. The problem with this deck is, the problem with this deck is it's a very strong deck, but like almost nobody plays it, and it is tough to play through Max Seed with this deck because you are definitely getting Max Seed every single time. It has the special summon so many times to put up any sort of semblance of a board. It's not like sometimes when you get Max Seed with other decks, like for example, like Super Heavy Samurai or Manadium or something like that, or definitely Labyrinth, some of these other decks, you can be like, oh, you know, I'll special summon a little, right? I'll get some interruptions. This deck has to summon like 5-6 times before it puts anything on board that's even mildly dangerous. So that's the problem with this deck. Batterymen is definitely, consider building something else. Solar is the best card in the archetype, and it's better in other decks. Element Sabers is one of the worst archetypes ever printed. You could put this in any era of Yu-Gi-Oh! It still suck. This deck is an absolute disaster. It has maybe one good monster, and the one good monster, you could argue, is like is the one that you have to discard 2 cards to summon. Like, that one might be the only good monster because it protects from like different things. The Elemental Lords, depending on the Elemental Lords, are good, but the problem with the Elemental Lords is they have like to summon them, you have to have 5 monsters in the graveyard in an archetype that has barely any mill power, so it's a disaster. Altergeist is at the somewhere in the middle of Rogue. It's a deck that used to be one of the best decks in the game, but again, it just got power crept to a point where it's just not as good as, it's just not nearly as strong as Labyrinth. Like, Labyrinth is the best trap deck by far. It can play on turn 0, it can play on turn 1, it can play on turn 2. It never stops playing. Doesn't matter what turn it is. The opponent's going to activate multiple effects. They're going to have a really good resource loop. This deck, unfortunately, is just the best thing you could possibly have is like Imperm with, yeah, it's like Imperm with Altergeist Multi-Faker. That's the best case scenario, and then you get to summon Silquidus and balance 1 card. So you essentially get 2 interruptions off of 2 cards in hand, which is like, okay, nice. Like, it's just not enough. Next is Blackwing, I'd say Blackwing's like in the middle of Rogue. It's actually probably at the higher end of Rogue. This deck is really annoying, and it's very, very played on Master Duel. Like there's a lot of Blackwing players, and to a certain degree, I would make the argument it's overrepresented because it's a fan deck. It's like a fan favorite deck that is very prevalent. Like you catch this deck a lot. And essentially, if this deck goes first, uninterrupted by hand traps, you essentially will lose the duel. Like every single time, if you're playing against them and they go first and you didn't draw anything, like you aren't able to stop their main combo. Sometimes they can even play through 1 or 2 hand traps too. If you don't stop their main combo, it might as well be an FTK because they summon at least 2 of the monsters that every single time you activate a card, you burn yourself for 14. So they summon 2 of those. On top of that, they have a negate. On top of that, they have the dude that's unaffected by everything, which is this dude right here, the master. So they have all of that stuff kind of in rotation. You have all like some really, really good cards. You essentially lose the duel at that point. It's a very, very, very strong deck going first. Going second, I have some struggles. This is Gravekeepers. This is the ultimate going second struggles deck. Basically, going first, this deck is quite good. It can lock a lot of decks out of the graveyard, and that's quite powerful against a lot of decks. Not super powerful against all decks, because some decks don't really care that you lock out their graveyard, and those matchups are auto losses. And then you have the remainder of the decks, which if you go second, there's nothing you can do with this deck. There's nothing, because the Necro Valley card is a proactive card. It's not a reactive card. So you activate it, and then your opponent can't do stuff. It's not like you can activate it and then deal with what your opponent has done. So Necro Valley is kind of one of those cards that's you draw it going second, it just does nothing. And the entire archetype is based around Necro Valley. So if you have it going second, it does nothing, and that's the problem with it. Now, if they created a card that lets you activate Necro Valley on turn 0, we can have a conversation, but right now that doesn't exist. FA is kind of like an okay synchro deck. I'd say it's just okay. It modulates its levels. You can mix it with UA's, FA's. It's an okay rogue deck, nothing too crazy. Magical Musketeers is, again, nothing crazy, middle of rogue, somewhere around there. It is an okay rogue deck. Going second is probably the best strategy you can have with it, but going second, like I always say, is not the easiest thing to do in Master Duel, because, I mean, have you seen some of these degenerate boards? You have Fossil Dyna, Floodgates, you have so many things going on, Runic Stun, there's so much going on. You really want to go second? Come on, be realistic. Next is Cyber Angels is considered building something else. Drytron is by far the best of the ritual decks, and it's not even really that good right now. So you play some of the Cyber Angels in Drytron, and then you don't have to lose. Time Thieves, pure Time Thieves is kind of a lackluster XYZ deck. It's an okay deck. Time Thief Redoer is a phenomenal card. Other than that, the archetype is kind of like You have the little dog, that tributes itself and summons 2 cards. That's good. You have like Flyback and some other cards that attaches material. That's all cool. Like there's some really cool stuff in the archetype, but for the most part, the archetype is kind of a disaster. But it does have some cool monsters. Dragon Link. Oof. Sorry guys. I think it's somewhere in Rogue. You can make an argument for. You could probably make an argument for tier 3 because it's still Dragon Link. We have to kind of respect it. But this deck got slammed on that ban list. Chaos Ruler gone. One of the dragons gone. Rip. Tear going down my eyes. I'm sorry. No. I don't want to deliver the news. You think I want to deliver news? I don't want to deliver the news. Yeah, it got slammed on that last ban list, which is kind of like, it makes you wonder why this deck. Like this, there were better decks. There were much better decks than this deck on the last ban list. I mean, there's on the last cycle. So why this? I think we all know why. I'm not gonna say it, but I think we all know why. Galaxy Eyes is Rogue. It's definitely Rogue. It's somewhere around here. This is another deck that I would argue is probably overrepresented in every aspect. Like you could be in Master 1, you could be in Master, this deck is there. You could be in Silver, this deck is there. It doesn't matter where you are, you're going to run into a Galaxy Eyes player 1,000,000%. There's so many Galaxy Eyes players on Master Duel, it's kind of outrageous. It doesn't matter if you're in Platinum, Diamond. I have I have a Masochist account where I'm in Platinum and Gold, and then I have my regular account where I'm in Master and Diamond. And no matter where I am, I always see this deck. The deck has some, I'd say, decent combo potential and decent going. It's kind of one of those decks that's just kind of okay in all situations. It's okay at setting up a board going first. It's okay at OTKing. It's okay at like playing through hand traps. It's kind of okay at everything. The only thing that really lacks is that, number one, it's not really great in anything. Number two, it bricks. Like it bricks. It just bricks. It just, I don't even know what to say. It just absolutely bricks sometimes because you're playing a bunch of high level monsters. And sometimes there's nothing that you can do. And some of the monsters are just built-in bricks, and that's kind of the issue with the deck. Next is Cyber Dragon. Going second, Cyber Dragon with like duality and stuff like that, I think is a pretty good deck. You can even make the arguments probably like a tier 3 deck or a high-end rogue deck. That deck is pretty cool. If you're talking about, I'd say the other version, the one of the structure deck that comes in the store, is probably actually worse than pure Cyber Dragons that are going second, that are fusing your opponent's board. Using the, I forget what the card is, but it's basically a card that turns everything into machines. Like, that deck is probably better. They're going second, fuse your opponent's board away, and attack directly. Like, that is probably the best version of Cyber Dragon. It's probably somewhere in Rogue. Jinzo, don't play this. Traps aren't that important in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And even if they were, Jinzo wouldn't be the way to solve that problem anyway. The best deck in terms of traps is Labyrinth. Labyrinth will demolish Jinzo. It's not even a choice. Product Plants, I'd say, is like a middle rogue deck. It's a good deck that can search super poly and it can do a lot of things, but sometimes it's a little too over resource intensive, where you need too many polys, too many monsters, too much going on, and you kind of like run out of cards and your board is just not that good. Also, it can struggle going first. Going second is definitely the better way to play it, but again, it suffers from the going second in Master Duel problem. This is Dragon Maids. I'd say Dragon Maids is somewhere around like Rogue. It's a deck that benefits from a really slow game state. We are definitely not in a slow game state right now. This decks like this and Sky Striker really want the game to be a little slower. Right now, we are the furthest thing from slow. This is not a slow game state whatsoever. This is probably the fastest the game has been in a while, so I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It's an okay deck, but nothing too crazy. This is Mathmech. Mathmechs got hit, but unsurprisingly are still fairly playable because they have shifted from being a regular Mathmech deck to now they're a Cybers pile deck, where they just use all of the best possible Cybers monsters. They use like the Firewall monster and some other cards, the new Firewall, all of that stuff. They can use all that stuff, and the deck is actually quite strong. It is definitely somewhere around tier 3. It's definitely not a dead deck by any means. This is Aromatherapy, and consider building something else. Plant Link is the way to play. Rika Plant Link is the way to play. Don't even try to play the pure version. Don't even try to play pure Aromatherapy. It's just way too slow. Kawaki Mera is one of the worst archetypes probably ever made. They don't work together. They work somewhat in Adamancipator, but purely they don't work. Next is, this is Trap Trick. I'd say it's probably a tier 3 deck. If it wasn't for Labyrinth, it would be the best trap deck in the game right now. But Labyrinth absolutely destroys them. And if you ever play Trap Trick versus Labyrinth, you're probably losing every single time. It just has an insanely bad matchup against Labyrinth. On top of that, the deck really kind of needs to go first. It can really struggle going second. It has good matchups. Like, it has good matchups against meta decks. Like for example, Kashtira is a certified meta deck, and this deck struggles. I mean, this deck is good against Kashtira. Like, going first, going second, regardless. This deck has a really good matchup against Kashtira, but unfortunately, you got to play everybody else because you never know who you're going to play on the ladder. Next is Phantom Knights. Phantom Knights is like somewhere around here. It's a decent deck. It's nothing crazy, nothing to write home about at this point, especially in the game. It was one of those like early. It was one of the decks that were good early in Master Duel, but it's definitely 1000% fallen off from where it used to be. It is no longer one of the stronger decks in the game. Dragoonity is, I used to say it was like a bad Dragon Link or like a worse Dragon Link, but honestly it probably moves up a little bit because Dragon Link got hit. It's pretty close, honestly, to Dragon Link. It just, again, it's one of those things where there's more cards that you need to play, so it varies the board that you can make. But at the same time, just because it's varied doesn't mean that it's going to be better in any way. It's very, very similar to Dragon Link, both in terms of the cards that you play and in terms of the boards that you can end on. This is like, what are they called? Live Twins, probably like a high tier rogue deck. I'd say the best way to play them is with Sprite, and honestly, pure Sprite is probably better without them, if I'm going to be honest. They're cool, but sometimes if the red one gets impermed, the turn is just over, and there's nothing more that you can do. Burning Abyss is an okay deck right now. It's kind of like in the middle of the Rogue Sea. It unfortunately it just can't compete with the big boys. It is a deck stuck, I don't want to say completely stuck in 2016 because it's had newer support that's kind of good, but obviously I don't think it's as good as some of the other decks. Infernobles are still waiting for the new support. When are we going to get that support? I don't know, but we got to get that, and then possibly Assault could get banned, but I mean, it really depends. With Infernal Knights, it really depends on a number of things, but this deck could go from very bad to like, it can go from rogue to like very good overnight. It just depends on how they decide to release things. That's the thing. If they release all of the fire support, like next set, bam, this deck is like really good. And especially if they don't hit if they release the Infernoble support and they release all of the fire stuff, this deck could instantly go to like really, really good, possibly one of the best decks in the game. But the issue is it depends on the order that they choose to release these things. Zombie World is right now kind of an okay deck. It's very matchup dependent, but this is one of those decks that can be very good. You can set up Super Poly against every single deck that I've shown on this tier list. So it can be a very good deck. It just depends on if changing the typing of your opponent's deck is a big enough deal to win you the game. And that's kind of where it is. It does have some easy wins. Like if you play this deck against Floowandereeze, it's just like auto win. Heroes, it can be an auto win sometimes. Like Insect Link, Dragon Link, it can really be an auto win against a lot of different decks because it changes the typings. Even like the Cybers pile, it can really be Dinosaurs. It can really win because it changes everything into zombies, and then it makes your deck like unplayable to a certain degree. But decks that don't care about typing, like Manadium sometimes, can really play around things. Rabina and the gang. This is Floowandereeze is probably like a higher end rogue deck. Still good, still can play D-Shifter, still can play under Max C. The deck is still the best tribute summon deck we have ever had in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And despite the fact that they've hit this deck as many times as they have, it's still a very strong deck. And it probably will continue to be a strong deck. It lost recently. What did it lose? It lost another Pot of Duality. But does that really matter? Honestly, no. It doesn't matter. It's going to keep moving along. Next, we've got Sword Soul is definitely a tier 3 deck. This is another deck that is just hyper consistent. Its best attribute is its consistency. It can make Baron, Shishao, and Blackout face down no matter what the situation. Going first, going second, the Tenyi, it doesn't matter what's going on in life. This deck will still end on that same board. And that is enough to beat a lot of people, because remember, that's 4 interruptions off of essentially almost a 1 card combo. No, it's like a 1.5 card combo will end you on 4 interruptions, and your opponent only has 5 cards in their hand, 6 when they draw. So you've already interrupted essentially those cards, and then you've interrupted their normal summon, and that could usually win you the game. It's actually quite good. So tier 3, definitely very good, highly respected deck. Kairushin Control is probably somewhere around the end of tier 3. This is another deck that's actually quite good. It just depends on the metagame. It can go first, it can go second, it can break boards. You have to build the appropriate deck to be able to do it. And it didn't really get hit in the ban list. It didn't really get hit on any ban list. The only thing it ever lost was Prosperity and Extravagance. And other than that, like, nothing really has changed with this deck. It's still just as good or bad depending on your matchup. The bad matchup for this deck 100% is Labyrinth. Labyrinth is just very tough. You don't have any trap negates, so it can be really annoying. Sylvan goes in to consider building something else. Again, if you're building a plant deck, play if you're building a plant deck, play Plant Link. That's the best way to play it. Next is Dinomorphia. I'd say Dinomorphia is somewhere around Rogue. It's another deck that just kind of relies on a slower game state, kind of like the Dragon Maids. It relies on a slower game state. It can have trouble, a lot of trouble going second. That's kind of the issue with the deck. It can have a lot of trouble going second. Going first, it can almost always win. It's kind of like Trap Trick in that way, where if it goes first, you're winning. If you're going second, it can be a little bit of a troublesome route for you. Next is Despia. This is the best deck in the game. Isn't that incredible? How many times have I made these tier lists, and this deck is the best deck in the game? Like, I'm tired of putting this deck up there, but I have to, because the deck just keeps getting new support, and Konami loves this deck, and there's another reason they love it. There's so many URs in the deck. They love decks full of URs. This deck is outrageously filled with URs, and at the same time, the deck is the best deck, but it's not like by far the most broken deck. The only thing that's really like broken about this deck, like really like frustrating to play against, is when they use the Sanctifier Dragon to put like a Winged Dragon of Ra's Disciple on your side of the board. That is the only thing that's like broken about the deck. Other than that, the deck is just kind of just consistent more than anything else. You also have the new Fusion Duplication card. I believe that's what it's called, Fusion Duplication. It's a trap card. You activate it, and then you basically use the effect of a fusion card in your graveyard, which is essentially Branded Fusion. So even though Branded Fusion's at 1, you can use Branded Fusion multiple times in a duel, and if it gets ashed, you set the Fusion Duplication, wait for your opponent's turn, and then you do your Branded Fusion stuff all on their turn and not on your turn. So it kind of allows you to play on your opponent's turn. This deck has always had a very easy time playing on your opponent's board, and it's by far the best fusion deck we probably have ever had. Next is Thunder Dragon. I'd say this is tier 3. Really good deck right now, actually. Really good deck. It's better than it's been in the past, especially because Colossus is better than he's ever been in the past. All these decks up here pretty much add, especially the ones at the top, which is important. This card is really, really good against super heavy samurais. Really good. If you summon this, it's like, okay, we can't add, we can't do anything. They don't have like imperms. They're not going to imperm your Colossus, so how are they going to get rid of Colossus? Great question. I don't know. Colossus is very good. You can splash in a lot of different decks by using a variety of other cards, but pure, I'd say the deck is kind of like in the tier 3 territory. It's a good deck, but not a fantastic broken deck. But it's Colossus is better than the archetype, but Colossus is kind of crazy in the metagame right now. This is another deck that just is kind of like, okay, now it got power crept completely. This is invoked. It doesn't matter what invoke deck you play, it's still going to be somewhere in Rogue. Doesn't matter if you mix it. The truth is, it's just, as a fusion engine, it's okay, and it's definitely not as good as Despia. Despia is the better fusion engine. It's been power crept. I'm sorry, guys. The bird combo. This is the birds, the Lyrilusks with the Tri-Brigades. Unfortunately, this is another deck that's just kind of fallen off. It doesn't have the barrier statue. Barrier statue is everything for this because it can end on a couple of interruptions / negates, and on top of that, it ends on a barrier statue. And the hardest thing to out was really the barrier statue, because then you have to go to battle phase, you have to try to attack over it, and then they protected the barrier statue, and now you wasted your battle phase. Then you can finally play, and now they have like Mist Valley Apex Avian and whatnot. But that was the deck before, and now that deck has the barrier statue getting hit really affected this. It actually affected it more than it affected the Floowandereeze, to be honest with you, because Floowandereeze had other stuff to fall back on. This is a tier 3 deck next. One of the best structure decks you could possibly buy. This is Salamangreats. It's a good deck, not a great deck, but a good deck. Again, very, very easy to combo with this deck. So many easy lines, 2-card combos, 1.5-card combos, 1-card combos. The deck has a very, very good recursion. It's probably one of the best recursions in the game because all the cards essentially do the same thing over and over every single turn. You don't have to worry about like, oh, I used that combo line and now the brick that is needed for that is in my graveyard and I can't do it again. This deck literally does the same thing over and over and over and over and over. Unless your Gazelle gets like Called by the Grave. Then you can't do things over and over and over. But for the most part, you can do things over and over and over as long as you have some Gazelle in rotation and some of the other cards. But it's a bananas deck. It's really good. This is Scareclaw. I'd say it's definitely like a tier 3 deck. It's actually quite a good deck. I believe it's Tri-Heart, Scareclaw Tri-Heart, the one that makes everything go to defense mode, and he's unaffected by monster effects. That guy's like really good because he's tough to out. He's 3,000. He changes your stuff to defense, and they can't do anything. It's like outrageous. Oh yeah, this is a very, very, very good card. The archetype though is kind of like it's in the middle end of tier 3. It's nothing too crazy, but it's definitely a good archetype. Nothing too broken. Sky Strikers is in a weird spot right now. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Even with the new support that got released, it's kind of just a Rogue deck. It's a deck that has great matchups, but then it has matchups that it just is not winning. This is one of those decks that it benefits from being in a slowed down game state by a lot. It's very good in a slowed down game state. Same thing with like I said, same thing with Dragon Mates. It benefits from slowed down game state. The problem is there's not a lot of that going on. There's a lot of very fast paced game state, as you can see up here. So it can be a little bit troublesome. Drytron is actually quite good. I'd say it's probably in tier 3. I put it lower before. I think I put it in Rogue. I actually think it's probably in like tier 3. It's one of the better. It's the best ritual deck ever made, and it's actually quite good. There's still a few cards hit that prevents it from being like really good, and we're probably all thankful for that if we're going to be honest with you. But I'd say it's probably somewhere around tier 3. Definitely has great combo potential. But going second can be a little bit rough sometimes with this deck. Next is Utopia. Utopia has 8 million support cards, but to be honest with you, the majority of the time that you see this deck, it is a bot that's FTKing you, or it's a bot that's failing to FTK you. That is the majority of the time that you see this on the ladder. For the most part, people don't play this fairly in the way that it should be played. This is Gladiator Beast. I'd say Gladiator Beast is probably somewhere in the middle of Rogue. It's a decent deck. It can end on a few interruptions. Unfortunately, the cool playstyle of the deck is pretty much dead. No one really runs them the way that they used to be run, which is, you go to the battle phase and have fun. All that's pretty much gone. It is just as generic as any other modern deck. It just kind of goes first and tries to set up like an Appaloosa. This dude negates, and it just essentially sets up on the normal stuff that any modern deck would do rather than have an alternative playstyle. Plunder Patrol is a good deck. It's probably somewhere around tier 3. This deck is definitely very playable, and most people don't know how to play around it, but basically you use monsters from your extra deck, you equip them to monsters on your field, and then you get additional effects out of it. Also, when you summon monsters from your extra deck, they're also like quite good. But yeah, I'd say it's probably somewhere around tier 3. It's a deck that if you don't understand this deck, you are getting OTK'd 100%. Sharks are a deck that keep getting hit peripherally on the ban list, which is frustrating, but it's the situation. So Gozen's gone, Totally Awesome's gone, and I want Totally Awesome back. Hit some sprites, guys. I want Totally Awesome back. Totally Awesome's gone. A lot of cards have been hit and have left this deck in a state of disarray. Orcust, I'd say, is probably like a tier 3 deck. It's a deck that definitely got better with the previous few ban lists. That's for sure. It's probably like a tier 3 deck. But honestly, you can even make the argument it's probably like a rogue deck. It's somewhere around here or here. It's a deck that definitely is more power creep than a lot of people are willing to admit. I think a lot of people want to call this deck amazing when in reality it's just kind of okay. Yeah, I'd say probably somewhere at the higher end of rogue. This is Amazement. Amazement is okay. It's just kind of like another trap deck. It's a trap deck that equips itself to your monsters, your opponent's monsters. Cool play style, but the problem is it's just in every way it's just not as strong as Labyrinth. And some of the cards are like in a lot of ways similar to like the Labyrinth cards, where they special summon themselves when the normal trap is activated. Like a lot of the things overlap, but overall the deck is just kind of not as good as Labyrinth. Next is Virtual World. I'd say Virtual is at the higher end of Rogue, maybe even tier 3. Honestly, you can make the argument as tier 3. With the Adventurer package, which you can still play, it's an okay deck. It can very easily get into the level 6 synchros, level 9 synchros, and then level 9 rank 9 cards, level 6 rank cards, level 8 synchros even. So it can quite creatively get into some really good cards. But overall, it's just kind of like an okay deck that doesn't have quite as high as a ceiling as some of the other decks up here. Ghost Trick is horrific. It got new support and nothing changed. It's just not a good deck. Marincess is probably like a tier 3 deck. It's water Salamangreats. It's good, but I don't think it's quite as consistent as Salamangreats, and it doesn't have as much recursion as Salamangreats. Recursion on Salamangreats is insane, and this deck has like a good situation going, but sometimes you get kaiju and just lose the game completely. If they out that one monster, sometimes it's the end. Earth Machine is probably somewhere around here. It's a good deck, but not like a fantastic deck. It's probably like at the end of tier 3. It's a good deck. It can use the machine card. The problem with this deck is you combo off for like 10 minutes, and then you end on like 2 interruptions, but your graveyard's full, so next turn you can do stuff, and you can do stuff on your opponent's turn. You have a recursion for the rest of the game, but like the problem is like your end board is just like so lackluster, it's unbelievable. Next is Tri-Brigade. It's definitely a rogue deck. It's somewhere around here with the birds and the regular. It's just kind of an okay deck. It's another one that's just kind of power craft. It's like cute. When Master Duel first came out, I was like, oh my god, Tri-Brigade, I don't want to play against it. But now it's like okay, you make an Appaloosa, and then on your opponent's board, you can flip the Tri-Brigade trap card and summon a Sherlock. It's like, okay, like you get one banish and an Appaloosa. It's not enough. Unfortunately, Mekk-Knights is another deck that goes through the going second tragedy of having to play through Max C while going second, while at the same time having to play through negates, while at the same time having to have the right columns set up. So if you're playing against something like Labyrinth, they don't even have monsters and columns in the same zone. They might not even have any monsters when they end their turn. And then you can like set a card and they activate it, and then now the columns don't align properly. It's a disaster sometimes with that deck. Next is Weather Painters. Is an okay rogue deck. It really misses skill drain. It really misses some of the just good floodgate effects that it had access to. Like skill drain is the main card this deck misses. Without skill drain, it's just kind of lackluster, and it can have a lot of trouble going second. Next is Harpies. Harpies can end on some crazy boards. Harpies is one of those decks that can also it can do a 1-card combo where it essentially can end on the board with a Colossus and like Baron de Fleur and stuff like that. It can end on that board, which a lot of decks can actually do. But the problem with this deck again is just your entire deck is built around like going first and setting up one of those like 4 negate boards plus Colossus. When you go second, you can have a lot of trouble doing anything whatsoever. So I'd say it's probably somewhere around rogue. Runic Stun is kind of in a weird state where I'd say it's probably like a rogue deck. It does still have the advantage of being in Master Duel, so your opponent can't like side deck mid-game against it. But a lot of cards in this continue to get hit. Pot of Duality, Card of Demise, like this deck just continues to get hit, and get hit, and get hit, and get hit. And it just continues to get worse, unfortunately, because of that. Naturia is a good deck. I'd say Naturia is probably somewhere around here. Probably like Sprite Naturia, Runic Naturia. I meant to say Runic Naturia, not Sprite Naturia. Runic Naturia is an okay deck. I'd say it's probably the best way to play Runic is through the Naturias, because you can set up a Naturia Barkion, or you can set up a Naturia, this dude Naturia Beast. Like it can set up some pretty difficult to play through boards, but again, going second can be a little bit rough if we're going to be honest. Madolche is one of the only ways left to actually use the Vernus Loofs. Like Vernus Loofs used to be so good, and now they're just kind of pointless. You can't really run them anymore because all of the millers are pretty much gone. All of the milling cards are pretty much gone, but the only way to really play them that's remaining is the Madolches. And the Madolches are actually quite good. I'd say it's probably somewhere around tier 3 deck. You have a good pilot, they can quite easily get to master. Next is Mermills. Mermills is a good deck, but it's one of those that just suffered from Toad being gone. In addition to Toad being gone, it just is a deck that has to combo off for a very long time. It can go second, can go first, but again, it's kind of like in similar fashion. It's kind of like where Galaxy Eyes is, where it's just kind of okay at comboing off, but it's like really good. It's okay at a lot of different things, but it's not like outrageously good at a lot of different things. Next is Cleavefort. It's a Pendulum / tribute deck, not nearly as good as our good friends, the Floowandereeze up here. Just nowhere near as good, unfortunately, and it definitely misses skill drain 100%. This is Adamancipator. This is Adagnister, I meant to say, not Adamancipator. It's probably somewhere around here. Honestly, this is a deck that ends on an unaffected monster, but it also has more interruptions in graveyard, and obviously it has other like cool Cyberse things that it can do. The problem with this deck is, number one, there's support announced, and the support's actually, it seems like it's quite good, but I don't even know if it's out in the OCG yet. So when we get it in a Master Duel, I don't know. So that's still on the back burner. But as far as the deck goes in Master Duel, I'd say it's just kind of an okay deck right now. It's not super good, and a lot of people are playing outs to unaffected monsters, and they're playing kaiju, so this can be a little bit of an underwhelming card to play. Fluffles are a going second deck that has to special summon a bunch. It struggles from the having to special summon a bunch maxi issue, but also it's a fusion deck, so it has a really good resource engine where it keeps drawing and drawing and drawing, but again, not drawing, but like adding things and drawing with Toy Vendor and stuff like that. It's overall quite good. It has the same issue as a lot of these other decks where it's not as good of an OTK deck as some of the others that I've shown, and it's definitely not as good as a fusion deck as, you know, as the branded is. Like, it's just not as good as branded right now, so I think it's somewhere around Rogue. Red Eyes is probably at the best. It used to be at the best state that it was at. It got that new Red Eyes card, which is really good, which sends a normal monster from the deck. The problem with this is it was very, very tightly bound to Dragon Link, and Dragon Link got hit. So now Red Eyes in a weird state where Dragon Link is gone. And it's in a tough situation. Like, what are you supposed to do? Dragon Link's gone. And Dragon Link was one of the main ways to really, like, beef up this deck's ability. So I think it's definitely somewhere in Rogue. Artifact is an unplayable deck pure. I don't know why you would ever want to play it pure. Next is the Cosmos. Cosmos is a good deck, not an outrageously fantastic deck. It's another deck that's kind of like Wind Witch, where it's stuck in 2017, where the big monsters can't be targeted. That was a big deal in 2017. Not being targeted today is irrelevant. Most effects don't even target anymore. It's just banish one card. You know, it's just destroy one card, banish one card, place one card on the top of the deck. A lot of the stuff that used to matter 5 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about, 6 years ago now. Actually, 7 years ago. 2017 was 7 years ago. Wow, okay. A lot of things that really, really mattered 7 years ago absolutely don't matter anymore. So it's kind of where it is now. It's a lower end Rogue deck. Next, we've got Speedroids. Speedroids can end on some crazy boards. Most people, unfortunately, go on like a Barone and maybe the Motorcycle, and then they pass. But like, this deck can actually combo off for quite a while. And like I said, it's a strong combo deck. It's probably the best of the Wind combo decks. It's probably one of the best ways to play Synchros outside of some of the obviously higher end decks up here. But it's one of the better ways to play Synchros in terms of Rogue decks. So I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. If you're going to play the Wind Witches, probably play them in here if you're going to play them anywhere. This is a deck that is just, I don't think it's that good. This is the Super Soldiers / Blackluster Soldier, the Ritual variant. I just do not think that this deck is that good. It is not that good. It is just flat out not that good. It doesn't do enough, unfortunately, to really do anything. Yeah, it doesn't have enough firepower to really do anything. It banishes like one card. It's a very slow archetype. It was slow for the time that it was released, which I believe like 2015 is when the new rituals started getting released. It was slow for that time period, so it's definitely slow now. Pure Shiranui, I don't recommend playing. Unfortunately, it's just a deck that takes too long to set up. You have to have cards in graveyard already, and then you have to start banishing them, and then you finally get to like what your deck is supposed to do. But it's tough to get them A in the graveyard and B to start banishing them. Starting to banish them isn't that difficult, but it's difficult to fill your graveyards with Shiranui monsters. That's the part that is a little bit difficult. Vehicroid's one of the worst decks ever made. Literally one of the worst archetypes ever made. It is incredibly weak, incredibly underpowered. It's a deck that's stuck in GX, and it's power crept for GX standards. It's a disaster. Magician Girls are terrible. Just play Pure Dark Magician, honestly. Don't waste your time. Next is this is True Dracos. True Dracos is an okay tribute deck. I still think that 100% the best tribute deck is Floowandereeze, by far, in a way, the best. But if you're going to play it, another tribute deck, I'd say this is probably the better tribute deck out of all of them to play. Again, the problem with this is Pot of Duality and Card of Demise is gone, and like all of these things are gone now, so it can be difficult for this to have draw power. Even though it does have in-archetype draw power, it can have some trouble with consistency, draw power, and a lot of the floodgates are gone. So, and then Masterpiece isn't around, so a lot of problems there. This is This is Buster Blader. Buster Blader is like okay. It's very reliant on going first. Going second can be very difficult for this deck. So if you go first, it can be good. If you go second, you can be in some really tight situations. Digital Bug is a deck I don't recommend you play. I recommend you just play the Insect Link. It basically, it triggers from, its effects trigger, their various effects in the archetype trigger from cards changing their battle position. It's a lot like Crawlers. It was almost like a beta for Crawlers, but Crawlers weren't even that good. So I'd say the way to play insects is in the Insect Link deck, which is right here, the Beat Trooper Insect Link deck. Paleozoics is a deck that is very, very heavily hit on the ban list. No Toad makes it very difficult to play. Number one, you don't have Toad. Number two, you don't have Skill Drain at 3. You don't have Grasslook Screener. Like, there's so many things missing from this deck, so it's definitely somewhere in Rogue. Next is, it's probably like a Rogue 3 deck. This is Lunalight. This is the Lunalight slash... It's a rank 8 Lunalight deck. Kaiju Lunalight. It's a good deck. Not a fantastic deck, but it's a good deck. The problem with this deck is, again, going second, tough in Master Duel. But it did get some new support with the Rimbrom. It can summon the Jet very easily. It can summon a lot of different things, the Jet Synchron. It can use a lot of different cool weapons. It can go into the Blackwing monster. You can use Sekka's Light. You can do a lot of things with this deck, but it's very expensive. This is one of the most expensive decks in all of Master Duel, and it's definitely it's more expensive than all the decks at the top, and it's not even as good as all the decks at the top, which is kind of crazy to think about. It's like virtually all URs. Exodia, don't build Exodia unless you're playing for fun. If you're playing for fun, I mean, go ahead, but if your goal is to get to Master 1, you're not going to get to Master 1 with Exodia. Just way too difficult. Next is, this is Spellbooks. I think Spellbooks is okay. Mix it with Dogmatica. That's your best bet possible. Dogmatica Spellbooks, best way to play it. Other than that, it's more of a draw engine at this point than it is like its own archetype. That's what most people use it for. Next is Crusadia. Crusadia is a good deck. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Going second is probably the way to play it. The combo version's been gone ever since Hackliff Ibrex is gone. Going second with it is okay. I wouldn't say it's like absolutely bananas and broken, but I'd say it's kind of like okay. Praying Kids is a deck that is hit on the ban list, but even if it wasn't hit, a lot of different, even its side engines are hit. So things like the what's it called package, this right here, the adventure package, are gone. Even the adventure package is like very heavily neutered, so it's not quite as playable as it used to be. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Nothing too crazy, but Rogue is probably like a fair placement for it. Zodiacs are probably somewhere around the higher end of Rogue. Maybe even, I'd say it's probably in tier 3, because the deck can still go second, and because they put Barrage at 3, it can really do some damage now. It can get much easier access to the actual Zodiac monsters that you need to see, and on top of that, you can mix it with other archetypes, so it's probably somewhere around tier 3. This is Endymion. I'd say Endymion is probably next to the regular Pendulum Magicians. Like, it's good, but it's not like super fantastic. I wouldn't put it in tier 2 or tier 3 by any means at any point in this time. I'd say it's probably somewhere up here. Nothing too crazy, but definitely serviceable. Dream Mirror is terrible. Like, it's almost unplayable, I would say. It's other than its artwork, this deck is just very difficult to set up the actual game plan. Unchained is a deck that any day now can jump from Rogue to like tier 2 or tier 3. There's some really good support that is existent in the TCG and OCG that's very strong for this deck, but in Master Duel, it's just very underwhelming around. It's still missing a lot of support. Ancient Gears is a deck that has support announced in the OCG, and as of right now in Master Duel, I wouldn't recommend playing this by any means. I would recommend playing Earth Machine, which is just kind of like a pure machine deck. I would not recommend playing just pure Ancient Gears, because they are just super underwhelming right now. Symphonic Warrior is another deck that can end on like the board with Barone plus Colossus and all that other stuff. It can do it quite easily, but again, it's a deck that kind of can struggle going second. It's okay. It's nothing too crazy. Libromancers is the second best ritual archetype behind Droitron's, probably somewhere around the middle of Rogue. Nothing too crazy, but decent. ABC ABCs are probably somewhere around Rogue. It's a good machine deck, but it's another one that's just kind of been power crept. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, it's kind of power crept, and it's just not quite as good at setting up some of the board states that the newer decks are. Like, it's still good. Like, Buster Dragon's still a good card, right? Target, banish, discard, like all that's still good. The separating itself into 3 monsters, the cards activating graveyard when you link them away, like all of those aspects of the deck are still good. But to a large degree, it's kind of fallen off. Next, we've got Earth Machine. Like, this is Earth Machine with the trains. It's probably somewhere near the regular Earth Machine. I probably put it in the similar area. I wouldn't play Therion's Pure. No one ever has, but this is an engine that works in a ton of different decks, but don't play it pure. Slifer is probably at the lower end of Rogue. I wouldn't recommend playing Slifer. Ra is definitely the better supported Egyptian god, so I definitely recommend playing that. Punks is a deck that is quite good. I probably put it somewhere in tier 3. It's a good deck, but not like outrageously good. I'd say it's probably somewhere up here. It's one of the best synchro decks you could play. You can mix it with the Gold Punk, but honestly, I actually think it's better pure than it is with Gold Punk, if I'm going to be totally honest. Sprite is a good deck. I'd say it's probably somewhere around tier 3. It's still one of the better decks, one of the best XE decks right now in the game. If you look up here, it is probably the best XE deck. I probably put this too high. It's still probably one of the better XE decks in the game, and to this day, you know, if you see a Sprite starter and you don't have any interruptions, you're probably going to lose the game, if we're going to be honest. Dark Magician is okay. It really hasn't changed from last time. It's still a rogue deck. Nothing's gotten better, nothing's gotten worse. It's essentially in the same place that it was many months ago. It actually is a deck that probably needs some more support. This is, I'd say, almost consider building something else a rogue. This is the Resonator cards. It's waiting on new support. It's released in the TCG and OCG. Whenever we get it, it'll be a better deck. Disbatter is a very good card in this deck and in general, so that'll be good. Final Countdown is almost impossible to pull off in Master Duel because the card's limited to 1. And, I mean, how are you going to search it? Triple Tactics Thrust? Like, how, to be realistic. Numeria with Grand Maju is quite good. Yeah, that one's pretty good. And then you've got Grand Maju Pure, which is also quite a strong deck. It's a deck that a lot of people won't see coming, and going second, it can be very good. So it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Next is Winged Dragon of Ra. Winged Dragon of Ra is definitely at the bottom end of Rogue. This is another deck that, weirdly enough, you just see at all aspects of the ladder. So you'll see it in Platinum, you'll see it in Diamond, you'll see it in Master 1, you'll see it in Rookie. Like, you see this everywhere. And despite that, the deck is just kind of okay, if I'm going to be honest with you. I think the problem with this deck is that Ra is just not a great boss monster. Like, it actually has good support cards. There's a lot of really good support cards in this archetype. The Egyptian God Slime, the Slime in general, the Metal Reflect Slime, Ancient Chant, Rising Sun God, like all those cards are good. And then the boss monster has no protection. He just summons himself out. You pay your life points and leave yourself with 100. And if they out it, you just lose. So that's the problem with this deck. Mekk-Knights are just kind of an okay deck. It used to be an FTK deck, but it's a little inconsistent, so it can be better as kind of like an OTK deck. This is a deck I wouldn't recommend playing. This is Relinquished. There's really the entire archetype is like 4 or 5, like it's like 6, 7 cards. Like, it's just such a small archetype. This is an archetype that 1000% needs more support. Next, we've got the Witchcrafters. Witchcrafters is another deck that's kind of like a lower end rogue deck. It just has a very low ceiling. It's extremely consistent, but very low in its ceiling. All it can basically do is end on like a quick effect pop and like a negate, and like a monster negate, and that's it. And it's just underwhelming, honestly. Sun Avalon / Plant Link is definitely like a tier 3 deck. It's definitely somewhere up here. It's a very, very strong deck. If you don't know how to play against it, you will lose. And the Rika package is bananas. It's really good. And this deck is really not hit in Master Duel almost at all, like it is in the TCG. Like, it really got hit in the TCG significantly. Like, I almost don't know why either. It like got hit so hard in the TCG, even though it was like essentially a tier 3 deck, much like it is in Master Duel. So I'd say it's probably around here. Ancient Warriors is a good rogue deck. Nothing too crazy, but it's great that it always survives every ban list for every single event. This deck somehow survives, so it's probably somewhere around rogue. I would not recommend playing the Ishizu cards pure, especially since there's one dude left. So you definitely can't play them pure. G-Golem is a deck that is quite good, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's good as an engine for other. It's a good as an engine for other Cybers decks. So it's good in perhaps like mixed into Salamangreat or mixed into a Mathmech, but it's not really that phenomenal. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It can increase the amount of bricks you play, which can be a little bit troublesome for you. Suship is another one that survives every ban list for every event. I'd say it's probably somewhere around here. It's actually, I would argue, gone up. Like, it's gotten a lot better, especially with the new metagame. So it's nothing, like, it never gets hit, and everything else gets hit around it, which is actually quite cool. And it has that new spell card that is quite good, the super rare, I forget what it's called, the Daily Order. That card's pretty good, so that got added. Overall, kind of a good rogue deck. Crawlers are like a lower end rogue deck. It is, I could even probably, actually I'm going to put it and consider building something else, because like I said, Insect Link is the best way to play insects right now, which is right here. You're going to play some of the crawlers in there anyway, so you might as well just play that and actually win. Skull Servants is like, I'd say it's like a middle of the end rogue deck. It's okay, it's not phenomenal, but it has to go second, and it definitely can lose to a variety of cards that are, like, it can have trouble breaking boards, and the entire point of this deck is to go second and try to OTK your opponent. Next is Rika. Rika Pure is still good. Like, pure Rika on its own is still a good deck, even though the best way to play it is Plant Link, but I'd say it's probably somewhere around here. Like pure, it's still a very strong pure deck because it's like Lair of Darkness but better. It can actually successfully tribute your opponent's cards, and yeah, it's very good. Gaia has a structure deck, but honestly, it's not really that great of a deck. It's just a little bit too slow, if we're going to be honest. Like, it's a cool deck, but it has to go second because the intention is to OTK, and the problem with this deck is, again, it's just a bit too slow of a deck to successfully OTK. It's very resource intensive. You have to use a lot of resource in your hand to successfully actually OTK your opponent. And very often they're playing this deck and you legitimately run out of resources and aren't able to OTK. Numeron is another deck that I'd say is like middle of rogue. It's a deck that's super fallen off. Literally, this went from one of the best decks in the game, or the best one of the best rogue picks, to just kind of like an average pick. Because to be honest, if you look at the top tier decks, like, Runic is actually not that great against a lot of these decks because you have things like Labyrinth. Labyrinth can summon multiple monsters in the battle phase. This can summon multiple monsters. The monsters in these decks float. Any monsters that float are really trouble for Numeron, because Numeron just wants to activate Raigeki or Lightning Storm, go to battle phase, attack with 4 monsters, win the game. That's what Runic was. I mean, not Runic. That's what Numeron wants to do. And it's tough to do that when cards float into multiple cards, because all you can basically go into afterwards is a either a Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avermax or like that Link monster that's unaffected by things that aren't Exceed monsters. Like, it's just underwhelming. Don't play Destiny board. It's absolutely trash. You won't be able to set it up. This is the Synchron. Synchrons is like a good deck. I believe it's still waiting on some of the new support cards, which will leave it somewhere at a higher end of Rogue than it is now. The problem is the same problem this deck has always had, which is it relies very, very heavily on Junk Speeder, and that is kind of the choke point of the deck. This is Amazonis. Amazonis is another deck that is good, but it would really, really benefit from floodgates like Goes in Match and Rivalry. It really needs those cards because those cards are perfect for this deck, but unfortunately, with those cards gone, the playstyle of this deck, all it does is just Amazonis monsters that protect each other, and that just isn't enough for the modern game. Next is the Vernisloofs. I wouldn't recommend playing the Vernisloofs pure. They are best with a package of earth monsters or machine monsters of some kind. No, it's either earth monsters of some kind. So you can mix them, for example, with the Ishizu cards, which you can't because they're all gone. Or you can mix them with Madolches, for example. That's really the only way left to really play the Vernisloofs. They're just kind of an okay deck. Tearlament is controversial. I think it's better than Rogue. It's probably somewhere over here. It's an okay deck. It's nothing too crazy. It's definitely a usable deck, but it's not as broken as it once was when it was absolute tier 0. A lot of the cards have gotten hit on the ban list, so the deck is definitely not anywhere near where it used to be. So it's definitely somewhere around tier 3. Next is Kaijus. I wouldn't recommend playing Kaijus pure. It's not really possible. It's very difficult to play Kaijus pure, but you can play Kaijus in a lot of decks like Lunalight Kaiju that I showed you earlier, and a variety of other decks. But pure Kaijus is definitely not something you should be doing. Next is Sacred Beasts. Sacred Beasts is definitely like a rogue deck. Great board if you're going first. Sometimes going second can be a little bit of an issue with this deck. It can set up really cool things. And there's a new support card that's supposed to be coming out. It's actually a level 7 that searches the fusion card. And that will definitely raise the ceiling of the deck, because it gives you another easy way to special summon a monster. It lets you search and special summon, which is like really cool, ignoring summoning conditions. So it's going to be kind of like another name for them, and definitely going to make the deck better. Next is Generator. Generator is definitely like a higher end rogue deck. This is a good deck that is another one that's like quite good. It can set up a very, very difficult to play through turn 1, but sometimes this is a deck that can have a bit of trouble going second, but turn 1 it can set up a board that is very good. Har is a very good card. The new support is very good. The Fire Girl, the Lopdar is good. Like, there's a lot of good cards in this archetype, but it kind of does the same thing with the field spell plus the tokens, and then just kind of has like the negate and maybe like a tribute pop from some of the other cards. It's kind of underwhelming, but definitely a strong deck. This is Dark World. Dark World is waiting on multiple new support cards, so it's waiting on the search card, which came out in the TCG at this point like 6 months ago. And then on top of that, it's waiting on the new fusion monster, which we don't know when we're going to get that, but we definitely need that. So we need the new fusion monster that comes out in a little while in Maze of Millennia. And then we're waiting on the other card, which, like I said, that search card's been out forever. Now, as far as the deck goes, it's still a good deck in the game. It can deck your opponent out through Max C, but the problem is it can die to a lot of floodgates, unfortunately, and it can be prone to, like, you activate a danger, the danger gets discarded, and the turn ends. Like, that's still a reality of the deck. You live by the danger, you die by the danger. Next is Goatee. This is the Fish Synchro deck. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It's an okay deck, nothing too crazy. You can mix it with a lot of the Sharks, but again, this is one of those decks that just kind of it came out, people were hyped, people were excited to play it, and it's definitely like fallen back since then. It's not quite as exhilarating as it once was. Next is the Dragons, the Elemental Dragons. I'd say they're probably somewhere around Rogue. It's cool that the deck is like a playable deck now, and it can go into the rank 7 package. And basically any deck that can go into the rank 7 package now can end on like a Colossus, a Borload Savage, and like a Baron de Fleur. Any deck that can go into the rank 7 monster, the Mecha Phantom Beast, I forget his name, the one that summons all of the tokens. Any deck that can go into that can essentially can be a decent deck and on a decent board. So I think that's why that is where it is. Next is Simorgh. I think this deck is just a worse version in a lot of ways than the it's in a lot of ways a worse version of Floowandereeze. Again, it's kind of like a beta for Floowandereeze. Like, they came out with this first, and they were like, how do you like this? Is it good enough? Let me know your feedback. And then they came out Floowandereeze. It's just a better version in every way than Simorgh. Evil Eye is a decent rogue deck that equips and protects the monster that it equips. I think it's a cool deck, but I don't think it's anything like meta impactful. Going first, it can set up quite an annoying board to deal with, and it can keep gaining attack, and it can keep protecting itself. Going second, though, this deck definitely isn't quite that good. Melfi, this is a crazy deck. I'd say this is probably tier 2, maybe tier 3, somewhere around there. It's still a very good deck, and it's still missing a card. It's missing one of the little Exceed cats. It did get hit on the ban list. I think it got hit not because it was that good, but because other decks were better. So it's probably around tier 3, tier 2. Other decks were better, but this deck got hit some more because it was just an annoying deck to play through. It's like an annoying situation that it puts you in, because it summons this giant unaffected monster. It's like 6,000 attack, and then it puts stuff on the bottom of the deck every time you try to do anything, so it can be really frustrating to play against. It's probably somewhere around tier 2. Mekanko's another deck that is one of those decks that is just very annoying to play through. It's probably at the higher end of Rogue. It going second, going first, it can be very frustrating to play through this deck. It is missing some stuff. I forgot, just like Dark World, it's missing those cards. There's new cards that are coming out that let you put in a monster on your opponent's board. Those cards are still missing in both Dark World, and they're missing in Mekanko. Both of them, they're called Ken and Gen. They're good cards, and they're missing in both archetypes, and definitely both will get significantly better. But as of right now, Mekk-Knights is definitely like a tier 3 deck. Going second, if you lose the coin flip and your opponent makes you go first, you're in danger. Because this can essentially, it doesn't matter what board you have. If you have a huge board with all these like interruptions, negates, it's still, they can just attack you with your 3,000 attack monsters and you'll still lose. It's kind of crazy. Really good. Next is Kashtira. Kashtira is a good deck for sure. I think it's still at the higher ends. It's probably somewhere around tier 3. It did get hit again. The problem with this deck is it ends on a board, if we're being honest, that's a little bit lackluster. That's the problem with this deck. Like, it ends on a board where you just kind of go, oof. Like, it looks good, but in reality, it kind of dies easily. If you can, like, imperm the Arise Heart, this board really isn't all that scary. Like, imperm on Arise Heart, and then you can just play as if nothing happens. Because then, essentially, after you imperm Arise Heart, the only thing they really have is the Fenrir. But if you don't have imperm for the Arise Heart, now you have to play through Macrocosmos plus Fenrir plus the other Kashtira cards like Unicorn and stuff like that. They can start banishing cards in your on top of your deck from your extra deck, stuff like that. Get rid of your consistency cards. That can be a little bit of a problematic thing. So I'd say top, very top of tier 3. Next is Rescue Ace. Right now in the current metagame of Master Duel, I think Rescue Ace is probably around kind of like the middle-ish of tier 3. It's kind of like an okay deck. I wouldn't say it's like a broken deck by any means. Again, this is a deck that new fire support comes out. It can definitely be good, but as of right now, it's kind of like a tier 3-ish deck. It's nothing too crazy, nothing to write home about, but it's a decent deck for sure. Ninjas are okay. I'd say ninjas are somewhere in Rogue, nothing at all too crazy to write home about. Again, it's a structure deck. They never make the structure decks that crazy. None of the structure decks are like broken. They make them like, oh, here's a tier 3 deck to play. Here's a Rogue deck to play. Here, have some fun. But it's never like anything broken because they don't want to give you any really good decks for free or for like 1,500 gems. So it's somewhere around Rogue. It's a decent deck. Nothing broken by any means to write home about. But it's cool. Gishki's another deck that is a Rogue deck. Now you mix it with the Sprite engine, you can definitely do a lot of stuff. If you ever read through the archetype, there's almost nothing that is once per turn, which is kind of crazy because they will combo off for 10 minutes straight. I'm not joking. They will combo off for 10 minutes straight. And they'll combo some more on your turn. It never ends. It's probably somewhere on the top of Rogue. You can 100% want to mix it with Sprite. Definitely at least play Sprite Elf. Good, but not too crazy. Prediction Princess is definitely not too crazy. I would say it's somewhere at the bottom end of Rogue. It's a Ritual and Flip Effect deck, which are two really slow typings in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's definitely got its problems just naturally built in from what it is. So it's somewhere around there. It does have some broken cards, like the Pot of Forbidden, which used to be a really broken card, but now it's just a bunch of average Yu-Gi-Oh! Effects on it. So I think it's somewhere around here. Stun is still strong. Like, you still can play in Diamond and Master, and there's still just stun players. People don't want to play the game. And to a certain degree, that's frustrating, but I'd say it's probably around tier 3. It definitely got hit. But again, if your opponent has a Fossil Dyna and you don't have an Imperm, what are you going to do? Nothing. You lose that game. If your opponent has a Fossil Dyna with a Moon Mirror Shield and you do not have an Imperm and you do not have targeting or destruction, you basically lose that match because there's nothing you can do. And to a certain degree, I understand where these people are coming from, because it's like they don't want to sit through a game where they have to watch a Scareclaw player, or not a Scareclaw player, let's like a Despia player combo off for 10-15 minutes while they sit there with their hands, with their hands on their lap, just kind of like waiting for your opponent to like combo off for 10 minutes. They just want to a certain degree, I would rather play against somebody who normal summons a Fossil Dyna and passes than somebody who's like playing Labyrinth. Because with Labyrinth, I now have to play this slow grind game for the next 10 turns. But sometimes with Fossil Dyna, if I don't have the right hand, I just scoop and get out of there. So to a certain degree, I actually kind of prefer playing against this. Weirdly enough, Gate Guardian's okay. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. Nothing too crazy. It can negate targeting stuff 3 times, and that's all cool. But like, honestly, they could have made this archetype a little more broken. Considering the amount of bricks that are in the deck, I think a more broken archetype could have definitely have been on the agenda for sure. Not virtual. This is Vanquish Soul is definitely somewhere up here. It's definitely in the higher end of the decks. I'd probably say it's somewhere around tier 2. Still a very strong control deck, and it honestly, not a lot of things have changed from last tier list. Like, it's still in the same similar position. I believe this was like in tier 1, and now it's not in tier 1. It's probably around tier 2. It's definitely a very good deck, but it's nothing like too broken. It benefits from Master Duel because the hand traps in Master Duel really work well, because they have Maxi, which is an earth, they have Ash, which is a fire, and then they have dark hand traps, which is a good variety of them are actually quite are dark, like DD Crow and stuff like that, and D-Shifter if you want to go in that direction. So the deck is definitely very good in terms of the hand trap choices that you can play. It's definitely somewhere around tier 2. And then the last deck is the Novellas, which is the Fusion Cheeseburger archetype. I'd say it's probably somewhere around Rogue. It's okay. It's cool that you contribute your opponent's monster, but it can be a little bit too slow, especially if you go second. This deck can be a little tough to set up what you actually want to set up. So I'd say it's probably somewhere around the middle-ish, the higher end of Rogue. It's one of the newer ritual decks, so it's definitely quite good. But honestly, I don't think it's as good as Drytron. But that is the tier list. If I missed anything, or if you want me to add any other archetypes, let me know in the comment section down below. And thank you for watching. La 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 la.